Following the Springbok success at the 2019 Rugby World Cup, fans were given, through the 5-part documentary Chasing the Sun, exclusive insight into some of the human stories, the sacrifices and the planning that went into that historic win. Following the highly charged series win against the British and Irish Lions, the documentary Two Sides painted pictures from within both camps as they prepared in trying circumstances and competed in empty stadiums. While those were retrospective looks behind the curtain, you are now invited into the Coach's Corner to gain never-seen-before insight into the meticulous preparation for the Springboks World Cup title defense in France. Our first episode deals with the crucial aspect of player welfare, ensuring both physical and mental readiness for the task that lies ahead.
From the 1st of July there, we went into a new season. In South Africa. So it was the first time that our season changed, yeah.
Yeah, that's
July
1st of July 2021. Yeah, so in the past it was easy because we ran from January to December. And in the beginning of the year we played Super Rugby, which was our preparation for our national games in June and July. And then we would have had our Currie Cup and went into our Tri-Nations at the end of the year tour. So it ran nicely from February to, say, November, and then we had our resting periods in December and January. But joining the European teams from the 1st of July in 2021, we had to change that. And then also we had the challenge that you referred to is on a provincial level, the guys could rest with the Northern Hemisphere, but on an international level, we had no rest period because there weren't any rest period for the guys. So that was the challenge we had from the 1st of July 2021.
What is the positives of playing in the Northern Hemisphere? The first thing is, listen here, we weren't in Super Rugby anymore. That's a fact. We just didn't actually have a competition. Now we moved to the Northern Hemisphere. Although there's now currently growing pains with travel and stuff like that, we actually have matches and games which our fans can watch at 6 o'clock at night and 8 o'clock at night, and they can, it's not at 9 o'clock this morning. We've actually, if you think about it, the most private and richest clubs in the world are in France, and we know a lot of our players are playing, a lot, currently I think, 4 or 5, which we are considering for the World Cup, which may be playing in France, but that's probably one of the most lucrative club-owning leagues where the best players should be. And then in the Premiership, there's a couple of our players there, and then, you know, those guys are actually the best of Ireland, the best of France, the best of those nations. And this weekend, for example, when one of our teams were playing Harlequins, on the starting team, the 15 of Harlequins and 15 of us, there were 19 in the starting who were South African. So, which we could actually pick. But then that's why I'm saying the positives out of that is totally overshadows, not the challenges, but okay, but now a guy is not running from January to December. He actually, a normal Springbok, is playing rugby championships right after the June incoming series, and he doesn't get a rest. And maybe you can just explain for a guy who was always in the Springbok mix, and then Andy, you can get to detail, but why are some guys resting during a rugby championship? If I can call it that, because that period, and once some guys almost contractually with my players and other players.
So it's an 8-week rest period, of which is a 3-week complete break, and then you start bringing the players slowly back. With the guys that play in the provincial competition, it's fairly easy to achieve that because they finish at the end of June, so they would rest in July and August. Basically, that's the 8-week period before they go into the URC in September. But of course, if you play in the incoming test matches in the PRC, you don't have that resting period. So the challenge there for the industry was, where do you rest those guys? And the only period that could be identified, and I think Andy, you also made a lot of input there, was that Six Nations period, because those URC teams will be without their national players, and then we can rest our national players. So you still have competitive parity between the teams as much as you can between the URC teams, because they will be without their national players and we will then be without our national players. But if we don't use that 8-week period, Andy, I don't think we would have had another period where we can rest international.
And also on top of that, the least amount of URC games in that 8-week period and no EPCR games. So arguably what is, let's say, the pinnacle of what was European rugby but is now Champions Cup, that doesn't get disrupted at all. So we don't take that away from the franchise.
And it works from a conditioning point of view,
Yeah,
in terms of the rest of the year.
A player who's always playing for the Springboks actually never got rest if you didn't work out a resting period for him somewhere. And what Eugene is saying now, the logical resting period is this period now, Andy, where when they play against, for example, the Sharks are playing Edinburgh this weekend. You know, they would be without their international players when we play Edinburgh because they are in Six Nations. For those top Springbok for us, to rest is actually this period where the Six Nations is on anyway. And that's where the guys who missed out on the December holidays and the January, who were playing that period, we actually with a lot of working together and understanding where the players come from, what we want from S&C, and what is the best for the franchises in this particular time. This 8-week block is the most common. Maybe you can explain those 8 weeks, Andy, in detail.
So, Coach Ross, when we talk about this 8-week, Eugene, because remember now, if I'm listening, let's say, for example, from the past, in the previous systems where everything was Southern Hemisphere, we normally used to have that block from end of November towards
10
January, for example. So that was normally that time of the break for our local players. And when you go to Christmas and also your off-season and your pre-season. So am I right when I say now, when we go to the block we're going to now in February, so that's exactly that block now that we used to have in December. Okay, so now you get it now in February.
But for the players who's been part of the Springboks consistently, and that's why we always had to individualize it. So there's a certain amount of players that actually Andy had to go and talk to their S&C coaches in detail and say, but we group these players here. And the 8 weeks, not 8 weeks off. It's like there's maybe a
2-week break.
And then explain.
And I won't go long. Very quickly, why we didn't need to do it last year? Because originally, remember we were speaking about possibly the 2021-22 season needed to do it, but COVID still had a part to play that year because remember the URC games were going, but actually December, January gave us a natural 7-week break. So well there you go. There's your off time.
Because of Omicron.
Yes. So, there you go. So and also no EPCR in that season. EPCR tournaments for South African franchises. I don't know the reason.
No, we weren't part of it yet.
So it was always going to be this season. It actually worked out naturally for us. Happy days.
There was natural breaks for the players anyway because of no EPCR and Omicron that started in the beginning of November gave us a 7-week players anyway.
This season we're fully loaded. If you're a Springbok player in these 3 tournaments. URC 18 games max plus the 3 knockouts, CBCR 4 pool stages plus 4 knockouts, Springboks up to 13 tests if you get selected or whatever you're fit.
Eugene, how many games can a player officially play in a year?
32.
So 32 is the max a player are allowed. That's just the agreement, more than 32. I mean, that's the world rugby. Not a standard, but per country. But 32 is like we don't want a player to, and it's not good for a player, and we agree 32 matches. But that starts from when July, from July till the next year, when it was normally from January to December, and it was maybe more or less matches. That was, I think that was one.
So it's basically approximately 20 matches for the franchise, so that you book basically and hold back that 12, which can be 13, and at times 14 tests.
Charlie, that's very true, and that's the big challenge with this new season. In the past, with 32 games, you had your 12 test matches and you had your 18 maximum Super Rugby games. So you never got to the 32 games. You never really had to manage it that much. But if you look at that top numbers that Andy's got there, you've got 18 games.
42 matches.
42 matches. All of a sudden, so that you need to get into 32.
Possible 42. You play every single.
100%.
But the challenge on top of that is, if a player's injured, he's actually not off. He's busy rehabbing or going to the doctor, or he doesn't have that. So it's not a simple thing of going and saying, that guy got a red card there, he was out for 2 weeks, just add that at the end. It is actually how much off time, how much rehab time, how many training sessions. So that's why you just can't put players blanketly into blocks or groups. But you can, how you try to individualize it. But not to, if a player this change, you're going to change and make him totally fall into another group. They fall into groups on all of the things you explained there, but we can't weekly, if a player now, his whole plan changes because he got a red card or he got an injury and he didn't play there. The basic principle overall must be that the player must get those weeks off.
Yeah, yes. And I think that, so all those things, weeks in camp, match minutes, game count, age, forward planning obviously has to take part in it. The thing you're saying there, like, let's say a match minute and a game count, I mean, Eugene, we've had this discussion plenty of times, is that a match minute can be deceiving because it can be seen relatively low, but the game count might be high. So that's then in an structured training environment, engaging in meetings, preparing for training, obviously preparing for a game. So that's the difference there. The actual regeneration or rest time, it might not be taking place, even though you might look at one figure and go, but he hasn't played a lot of rugby.
So the current group of national players, the core guys, they were playing from the Lions series 2021, and unless they thankfully to not playing EPCR, and unless they were knocked out earlier, this is the first structured break that they would get.
Yes, structured, yeah.
So from June 2021 to February 2023, they've been going non-stop. The only time where they were safe was basically EPCR, not playing EPCR.
And COVID.
And a little bit of COVID and falling out of competition earlier, like shots, etc. But there were no structured break, basically in a 21-month period.
That's
the first time.
I'm going to say it again, Gina, and almost if it wasn't this approach, emotionally, when a coach is in the thing, and you see this in black and white and was communicated everything, even I would think, let's push him another week here, a week there. It's just a natural thing. And even a player would think, you almost forget because of emotions of an important pool game. He goes, I'm going to push through on this one. But because naturally there would have been a break all December, and a player would think, I have that break. But if we don't remind him and put it on paper now, a player would also say, I can go another 2 weeks. But it's almost like he's emotionally making a decision, and we are sometimes as a coach, franchise coach, making a decision and saying, but I can push another week, squeeze another week out of this player. Yeah. But then eventually, I just think because this is in black and white and agreed with, and it makes scientific sense. We can't emotionally make decisions. Yeah. You just can't have. Maybe latch onto this, and that we started with Charles's calendar. Remembering only 33 guys eventually going to the World Cup. We are monitoring players from Felix on that side, and Don in Bloemfontein going around the franchises, and you communicating to everybody. Just a rough. It varies with 4 players this way and 5 players that way, and some guys get out of our radar. But how many players would you say we're keeping tabs on currently when we go through that?
I would say 45. We started, I think, British and Irish Lions, before that tournament, we started at about 90, and then it came down. So I would say between 45 and 50, depending on injuries and depending on how sure we are of certain positions, so that would fluctuate, And that would be in detail. So that would... We will look at every single action of that player, every single game that he plays. But there is almost, I would say, a fringe group that we also monitor, but maybe not as in depth. But if something happens to that 45 group that we are looking, it's a quick swapping to get that guy into the mix.
Yeah. Thinking that only 33 players is eventually going to the World Cup, you actually must have a group at least 45, because in each position you must say, but if we get 2 injuries now, we are covering a lot of positions. Yes. But you can't just bring something new into it and then expect that person, if we haven't been road mapping him and know exactly what he's doing. But at that first game, and maybe we finish off with that, at that first game, not who the players are, but who will be the players, because sometimes people, or we think, everybody think, bringing in 6 players, I'm not saying that's going to be the number, but people think that's a waste of money. But it's not if you take the portion how much that is out of 33 and the time, and so who would be the guys that will be available for that first camp?
So the guys that will be available for the first camp obviously is the URC guys that have played the majority of our test matches, and like Andy rightly said, they were in camp the most, they played the most minutes. We're looking at age there, so it's probably the core of our South African based players that will go to that first conditioning camps. And so and currently I think it's the group that we are looking at joining us there will be, I think it will be roughly a group of 14, 16.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of people will go, oh, if I didn't make that 14, 16 and I'm locally based, I'm not going to the World Cup. And that's where sometimes when we get that camp going, we sometimes had an alignment camps who wasn't even there, but the guy was playing in the first test match.
Yes.
It is just that camp is there so that we know we're hitting the odds target of 80% of the players which were normally in our mix and who've now actually, but sometimes we think a guy's age and about how emotional already about us and how many games he's played. You don't actually have to invite him to that camp, and where he's now, if he's resting or whatever he's, or where he's been on a period, injury period or something like that, or maybe a young guy that you think just bringing him into alignment camp, it wouldn't quite work for him. He must come into where actually. So there's this, that camp is definitely not other guys outside that. There's a lot of factors that this alignment camp makes sense for this specific group.
Yes.
There's a lot of other things that play there.
So Rassie, a lot of guys that will not end up in that camp, that will probably be going to the World Cup as guys that have had that weren't part of the rugby championship in 2022. You know, so but they became regulars at the back end of the season and stuff like that. So a lot of them has had their break. So which this group haven't had. They were part of that group that traveled with us. So yeah, you're 100% right. As a lot of guys are not at this camp because they already had their rest and development block in I would say what was that July and August. Yes, they already had the development block there.
A lot of people take the conclusion, and then we'll maybe finish off with this. The first camp is there. 15 players has been there. Why do you have so few guys there? But we're only taking 33, but we're almost taking the bullseye. We're hitting 80%, but there's a 20% who it just doesn't make sense to take them to the specific camp for various reasons.
Yes. Yeah. And like I think the bottom line is the guys who's in that camp is not, like you say, 80% will probably, if they continue performing and if they continue to play well and if they continue to be aligned with us, they have a good chance of making the World Cup. But the guys who's not there, there's a lot of them that will not be at the camp, that if they continue playing like they're playing, they will also make the World Cup.
Yeah, and the core of our franchise players currently, which a lot of people are saying our competition are weaker, but now we won the URC and we have two teams in the final. And again, in all EPCR games, with all the travel, logistics and everything, most of our teams, all our teams are through to those semis. And then, I have to say it with probably, Eugene, you can correct me, I'm not going to be quoted on exact numbers, but for us to have I think more than 300 players playing abroad, but not all of them are, I'm guessing, was way back. But we know who are monitoring from overseas. But if you probably take that salary pool, and you're still seeing how players are coming through in URC, we've got the best of both worlds. Yeah. Because Harlequins play the Sharks, we've got 19 players starting, and we can pick all of them. But yet, though, the Stormers won the URC last year. So they can't say our teams are weak because we won the URC. Yeah. It might be different this year. You know, it might be different. And then on the other side, if you are selecting, for example, an England team, but this weekend out of Harlequins, there were maybe just 15 Harlequins players eligible for England, where we had 19. Well, I guess it's less for Harlequins. So foreign-based players playing for us is almost always a topic that always comes up. But we would rather have this than have a lot of players playing in South Africa who is qualifying maybe for other countries.
Yes.
Like all our players are locally qualified in South Africans. We don't get. Beast was the last player who came to us and who qualified through residency. We've got all South Africans playing locally and abroad, being South African, and obviously we can afford the bill of the local players playing and the amount of professional player. And I mean that's not something. Maybe just something we watch the game sheets. Is that a benefit or not?
I think, Ross, I think there's different benefits in terms of this. Obviously, you are alluding to the results of our teams and how well they perform. So it shows there's on-field and off-field benefits. I mean, from an international competition perspective, if you just think about off-field benefits, you've got youngsters in different teams, promising players, touring different countries, playing against the best in the world. Different conditions, different teams, different coaching mindsets. I think if you see it, how those players made that step up, you understand, in playing at this level, I think that's a spin-off of a benefit in terms of playing in this competition.
Ras, maybe just a last point. We have to allow that because we don't have enough funding also in our country to develop all our talent. Other countries do have enough funding due to the exchange rate, etc. But we would be dumb to lie to ourselves to think we've got enough funding to develop all our talent. So we want to send some of our talent into other countries, develop them for us. What we can afford, we'll develop here. It broadens our pool and our depth in terms of players. It allows the player to go and do career development in another country, get some IP. What happens in those countries regards the rugby, bring it back. So I think we will be lying to ourselves to think we should keep all our players here. It won't work with our economy and our funding that we have.
We currently probably from the Premiership, where it was maybe in the beginning 9, 10, 11 guys that we were looking at, which not. Because the access we're getting to those guys, and probably the guy who's going to the Premiership, and because of that restriction which they have in the Premiership, it's actually difficult for a player to if he's not really standing out, and because he's not that available to us. Yep. So which is actually just a fact. When players look and say, oh, there's a couple of Japanese players more than there's 4, 5, or 6 Premiership players, but there's 11 Japanese players. And then they say, oh, what about the local competition? The local franchise competition, we did win last year and have a team in the final. So would we have won the final better and have more teams in the final? No. So it's a perfect thing when we get the players through, get them to experience that, and then when what countries, clubs work the best with us, we will actually probably going to fall out of contention because this club doesn't give us any access at all to you. And then maybe that will be the first camp, South African-based players who we're looking at, and we feel have specific needs to get aligned to. Not specifically he's going to the World Cup will be the first camp. And I think that's where we must wrap it up. And the next time we're going to realigning again on where we're going with the second camp, if we do it in another 2 weeks' time, 4 months' time.